My name is Rachel Morgan. For years, my parents praised my younger sister and ignored me, but at her wedding in Aspen, I became the shadow they could not control. While the guests raised their glasses, her groom revealed the darkness he had been hiding, and I carried proof that would not only destroy his perfect mask, but also expose the secret my own mother tried to bury. No one in that ballroom expected the forgotten sister to bring everything crashing down. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, in a house with a white fence and a porch where the paint peeled every winter. To neighbors, it looked like the perfect family home. Inside, the balance was tilted from the very start. My father, Robert, always lit up when my younger sister Lily walked into a room. He praised her drawings, her dresses, even the way she smiled at guests. My mother, Helen, chimed in, her voice bright with pride. When it came to me, their older daughter, they said little. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the girl who could take care of herself. That label became the excuse for their silence. I still remember in 5th grade when I came home with a blue ribbon from the science fair. I set it on the table, waiting for my parents to notice. My father glanced at it and asked Lily if she had shown Grandma her new hair clip. The ribbon ended up shoved in a drawer, forgotten, while Lily's crayon drawing stayed on the fridge until the paper curled at the edges. At the dinner table, my father leaned toward Lily, telling her how smart she looked in her new dress. If I tried to share about a scholarship application or a test score, he returned to his plate. My mother once told me I was too serious, that life was easier for people like Lily. I learned how to press my lips together and let the silence sting inside. My grandfather, Harold, was the only one who saw me clearly. He had been a teacher for 30 years, and when we sat on the porch swing, he would rest his hand on my shoulder and tell me that strength was not measured by applause. It was measured by persistence when no one clapped. His words wrapped around me like a blanket when the house felt colder than the Colorado winters. On Lily's 10th birthday, the backyard was covered in balloons, and neighbors filled the yard with cameras flashing. A clown juggled while children laughed. I sat at the edge of the yard with a small cupcake in my hand. My birthday had passed quietly the week before, with no party and no guests. I watched Lily blow out candles on a 3-tiered cake while everyone clapped. My father filmed it all. My mother fussed over Lily's hair bow. Nobody looked my way. I pressed my finger into the frosting, trying to focus on the sweetness instead of the ache in my chest. That night, I whispered to myself that one day I would no longer be invisible. The pattern continued. Lily joined pageants and school plays. Every medal she earned was displayed in a glass cabinet in the living room. When I graduated high school with honors, my father stayed home because he said someone needed to drive Lily to her recital. My mother told me she was proud but never took a picture. My diploma lay folded on my desk, while Lily's recital program was framed and hung on the wall. When my grandfather grew ill, I spent evenings by his side reading to him and listening to his stories. In 2018, after he passed, the family gathered in a lawyer's office for the reading of his will. I sat in the back, expecting nothing. When the lawyer read my name, I felt the air leave my lungs. My grandfather had left me his small house on the edge of town and a velvet box with a necklace and earrings. The jewelry was valued at around $250,000, but to me, it was worth more than any number. It was proof that someone believed in me. My parents exchanged glances. Lily bit her lip, and for the first time I felt a spark of validation. I walked out of that office, into the evening light, clutching the box to my chest. Tears blurred the traffic lights as I crossed the street. It was not about the money. It was about finally being seen, even if only by the one person who had always cared. I promised myself I would protect his trust with everything I had. Still, it is not the inheritance that haunts me most. It is the memory of Lily's birthday party, the sound of sparklers crackling, and the cheers when she blew out her candle as while I sat quietly with a cupcake, no one noticed. That was the night I made a vow, never to let anyone bury my worth in silence again. What I did not know then was that this vow would be tested in ways I could not imagine, and it would all begin with a wedding invitation that arrived years later. The envelope arrived on a late August afternoon, heavy cream paper with Lily's name in gold letters pressed deep into the surface. I held it in my hands longer than I should have, my thumb running along the embossed edge, as if touching it might change what it meant. When I opened it, the words announced a wedding at the Ridgeview Hotel in Aspen, a place known for its marble floors and glass chandeliers. My sister was marrying a man named Nathan Brooks, 32 years old, a man I had only met once in passing. My phone rang minutes later. My mother's voice was sharp but wrapped in false sweetness. She told me to come to the wedding to sit quietly to make sure nothing distracted from Lily's big day. I held the phone to my ear in silence, biting down on the urge to ask if she had ever once told Lily to keep quiet for me. Instead, I said I would be there. Her relief was almost insulting. That night I called Maggie, my closest friend since college, who now worked as a journalist in Denver. She laughed bitterly when I mentioned Nate's name. She had heard whispers about his deal stories of small investors left empty-handed. I wanted to argue to defend my sister's choice, but the truth was, I did not know Nate well enough to speak. All I could say was that Lily seemed happy, and Maggie's silence on the other end of the line made me feel foolish for trying. The following evening, after finishing work, I opened my laptop to clear emails. My eyes froze on a subject line I was never meant to see. It was a reminder from Langford Bank about a past due balance under the name Nathan Brooks. The words "payment overdue" glared back at me. My pulse quickened, my mind racing to connect Maggie's warning with this mistake that had landed in my inbox. I knew emails could be misdirected, accounts confused, but I also knew banks rarely sent reminders to the wrong person. I sat in the dim light of my apartment rereading the message. It was not enough to accuse anyone. It did not prove anything beyond doubt. Yet the knot in my stomach told me it mattered. I saved the email to a private folder, my hands trembling. I stared out the window at the Denver skyline glowing against the night and wondered what kind of life my sister was stepping into. Sleep was restless. I dreamed of marble halls and Lily walking down an aisle lit with candles, her hand on Nate's arm, while shadows whispered in the corners. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, and poured myself a glass of water that did little to calm me. I told myself it was none of my business, that marriages are built on trust and secrets alike, and I had no right to interfere. But the thought would not leave. Days passed, and preparations for the wedding consumed the family. My mother sent me curt texts about dress codes and arrival times, never once asking how I was. My father avoided calls altogether. I imagined them buzzing with excitement, planning every flower and photograph, while I was told simply to show up and sit in silence. I folded the invitation back into its envelope and placed it on my desk, where it seemed to watch me whenever I worked. Maggie called again a week later, her voice steady. She reminded me that appearances were easy to polish, and that men like Nate often counted on silence from the people who could see through them. I brushed her off, telling her it was only an email, only a rumor, nothing concrete. Still, when I hung up, I could not shake the feeling that something was already cracking beneath the perfect surface of this marriage. The day I packed my bag for Aspen, I slipped the printed copy of that bank email between two files. I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind. But deep down, I knew I was carrying proof of something my sister deserved to know. I just had no idea if I would ever find the courage to show it. What I did not realize was that the seating chart at that wedding would be the first real sign of how unwanted I truly was, and it would set the stage for everything that came after. I arrived at the Ridgeview Hotel in Aspen on the morning of September 15th, the air sharp with the first hints of autumn. The lobby smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, and the marble floor gleamed as if it had been scrubbed for days. Guests in gowns and tuxedos moved about with practiced grace, greeting each other with smiles that seemed rehearsed. I walked in wearing a navy dress that I had chosen carefully simple but elegant enough to blend into the background. No one in my family turned to greet me. My mother was busy fussing over the floral arrangements. My father stood near the bar, shaking hands with other guests, and Lily was surrounded by bridesmaids, her laughter ringing through the room. I made my way to the seating chart displayed on a large easel near the entrance to the ballroom. Names were written in calligraphy on thick cardstock. I scanned the list slowly, expecting to find my name somewhere close to the family table. I looked once, then again, my heart sinking as I traced each line. Finally, near the bottom, I found it. Table 16. When I entered the ballroom, I realized it was a small table tucked beside the swinging doors where servers hurried in and out carrying trays. The tablecloth was wrinkled and the chairs were mismatched. Helen spotted me and walked over, her smile tight. She touched my arm lightly and said it would be quieter there, that I would be more comfortable. Her voice carried just enough for two nearby guests to hear. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered, their eyes sliding over me, the words, "Forgotten sister," hanging heavy in the air. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but forced a smile, pulled out the chair and sat down. The clatter of dishes and the rush of servers brushing past my shoulder were my companions. I caught sight of Lily gliding into the ballroom in her gown fabric flowing behind her like a wave of light. She looked every bit the bride she wanted to be. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says nothing at all, then leaned down as she passed by and muttered that I should not make a scene. Her perfume lingered long after she moved away. I kept my gaze steady on the table, tracing the pattern in the silverware to keep my breathing calm. My chest tightened with every murmur from other guests, with every glance that slipped past me, as if I were invisible. I pressed my palms together in my lap, forcing myself not to leave, not to give them the satisfaction of watching me disappear. Nate appeared not long after. He moved easily through the room, shaking hands and clapping shoulders, his charm smooth as silk. People laughed too loudly at his jokes, eager to be near him. Eventually, he drifted toward my table. To anyone watching, he leaned in like a gracious groom welcoming his fiancée's sister. His smile was wide, his tone warm, but when he bent close enough for only me to hear, his words cut like a blade. "If you ever say a word about me, you will regret it." I froze, the hum of the kitchen behind me mixing with the thud of my heartbeat. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the look in his eyes told me he knew exactly what I had seen and what I might still discover. Then he straightened, raised his glass to a passing guest, and walked away as if he had said nothing at all. I sat still, my hands clenched beneath the table, the weight of his warning pressing down on me. For the first time, the email from Langford Bank no longer felt like a small mistake. It felt like a door cracking open onto something darker. And I knew that the rest of the evening was going to show me just how deep that shadow ran. The ballroom filled with the sound of clinking glasses and the murmur of polite conversation as dinner was served. The chandeliers threw soft light across polished tables, and the string quartet played a cheerful tune in the corner. Nate moved among the guests like he owned the room, shaking hands, raising his glass, pulling laughter from every circle he joined. From my seat near the service doors, I watched him perform, his smile wide, his voice smooth, the perfect groom. When the champagne kept flowing, his posture began to change. His laugh grew louder, his words slurred just slightly, but enough for those close to notice. At one table, surrounded by his old college friends, he leaned back in his chair and waved his glass toward the head table where my parents sat with Lily. Then his eyes shifted, landing on me across the room. His smile curled into something sharper. He lifted his glass higher and said in a voice that carried over the music that I was nothing, that I lived off pity, that this family needed him and not me. A few of his friends burst out laughing, one of them clapping the table so hard the silverware rattled. The sound rippled, catching the ears of other guests nearby. I felt every pair of eyes flicker in my direction, some curious, some uncomfortable. My chest tightened, as if the walls were closing in. I looked toward my mother, hoping for even a flicker of defense, but she bent down to adjust the linen on the table, as if the crease in the cloth required her full attention. My father lifted his glass and turned his head toward another guest, ignoring what was said. Lily sat frozen for a moment before forcing a weak smile, then reached for her wine, as if she had not heard her husband-to-be humiliate her sister in public. I gripped the edge of my chair nails, pressing into the fabric. My throat burned, but I refused to let the tears rise. The hum of the quartet went on, but to me, the room was suddenly silent, every sound muffled under the weight of his words. Then a hand touched my arm. I turned and saw Anna, a friend who had been invited through Maggie, and knew my history more than most. She shook her head slowly, her eyes steady. Her voice was low enough for only me to hear. He is showing his real face now. I swallowed hard and nodded, forcing myself to sit straighter. Nate continued his performance, laughing too loudly at his own jokes, sloshing wine as he raised his glass again. Guests who had chuckled earlier began to exchange glances. Some leaned away from the table, no longer as charmed. Still, no one spoke up. No one called him out. The silence of the room told me everything. His arrogance was not only tolerated, but protected, shielded by the glow of a wealthy venue and a family desperate to maintain appearances. The insult replayed in my mind, each word sharper than the last. Nothing. Pity. Not needed. I pressed my lips together and steadied my breathing. This was not just about me. This was about the way he believed he could step into our lives and claim authority, using humiliation as proof of his power. I lifted my eyes and watched him circle the tables, drunk on more than champagne. He was drunk on the belief that he had already won, that no one here had the courage to challenge him. And in that moment, I realized the truth. His confidence was not built on love for Lily or respect for my parents. It was built on secrets, the kind that corrode from the inside out. As I sat in the dim corner with the doors swinging behind me and servers rushing past, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. His mask was slipping, and though the crowd still clapped and smiled, the cracks were beginning to show. I did not speak. I did not rise. I let his words hang heavy in the air, memorizing the way people looked away, the way my family sank deeper into their seats. Something told me this was only the beginning, and the real proof of who Nate was would come to me soon enough. My phone buzzed against the linen tablecloth, the vibration lost in the clatter of dishes and the hum of music. I glanced down, half expecting another meaningless family text. But it was from Maggie. She had forwarded a chain of emails and attached scanned documents. My breath caught as I opened them under the table. They were loan agreements from Langford Bank, each stamped and signed with Nathan Brooks's name. The numbers glared back at me, hundreds of thousands, in overdue balances, penalties, stacking like bricks. Before I could process, my phone lit again. Ethan Carter's name appeared, my friend from college who had become a financial attorney in Denver. I slipped out to the edge of the hallway where the music dulled to a low murmur and answered. His voice was clipped. He had seen the files Maggie sent. He confirmed every detail. These were real. If I showed them, Ethan said Nate's reputation would collapse before he could even say his vows. My stomach twisted as I leaned against the wall, the sounds of laughter echoing faintly from the ballroom. For a moment I thought about Lily in her gown, her eyes glowing with a happiness she wanted to believe was real. Could I destroy her night with the truth? Could I be the one to break her illusion? I slipped my phone into my clutch and walked back inside. My mother was standing near the family table, her purse open as she searched for lipstick. Something caught my eye. A folded packet of paper, the edges marked with the seal of our grandfather's attorney. I knew that color, that stationery. My pulse pounded as I shifted closer. When she stepped away to greet a guest, I glanced into the purse. What I saw made my knees weaken. It was a copy of my grandfather's will, but not the one I had been given. The wording had been altered. Where my name should have been written as the heir to his house and jewelry, Lily's name had been neatly inserted. My mother had carried it with her, tucked beside her makeup, as if it were nothing more than a grocery list. I forced myself to stand still, my hands shaking at my sides. The weight of the betrayal pressed down hard. This was not just about Nate's lies. My own family had twisted the truth, trying to erase the only proof that my grandfather had believed in me. I looked at my father, laughing with a guest oblivious or unwilling to care. My mother clutched her purse again, unaware that I had seen inside. My chest burned with the realization that their loyalty to Lily went deeper than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I sank back into my chair, staring at the glowing screens above the dance floor, as the band shifted into a louder song. The chatter of guests blurred. I thought about the vow I had made as a child, with frosting on my fingers and tears in my eyes. I thought about my grandfather's steady hand on my shoulder. Strength, he had told me, was persistence when no one clapped. Tonight, persistence meant more than staying silent. It meant choosing the right moment to speak. I slid my phone out again, scrolling back to Maggie's message, rereading Ethan's words. Everything inside me screamed to stand up right then, to hold the papers high and tear the mask from Nate's face. But something stronger told me to wait, to let him believe he had won, to let my family bask in the illusion for just a little longer. Then, when the lights were brightest and the room was watching, I would show them who he truly was and what my mother had done. I folded the printed email and tucked it into my clutch beside my lipstick. My fingers brushed the velvet box of earrings I had worn from my grandfather's gift, a reminder of the trust he had left me. My heart steadied. This was not just a wedding anymore. It was the stage for truth. What I did not know was that the microphone would soon be passed to me, and the moment I had been waiting for would arrive under the glow of every chandelier in that hall. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and invited close family to share a few words. Applause rose politely, and one by one relatives stood and offered rehearsed blessings. My palms grew damp against the clutch in my lap. Then I heard my name. My chair scraped the floor as I rose, the spotlight sweeping toward me. The ballroom fell quiet as I walked to the stage. The chandeliers burned hot above me. My heels echoed on the polished floor, and I felt dozens of eyes press into my back. I reached the podium, steadying my breath. Before I could speak, Nate's voice sliced through the silence. He laughed short and sharp and told the room that I had nothing worth saying. A ripple of chuckles followed, cruel in their ease. My mother lowered her gaze. My father sipped his wine. Lily's lips trembled, but she forced a smile. I stood still, feeling the burn in my chest, then reached into my clutch. My fingers closed around the small USB drive Ethan had helped me prepare. I turned to the technician and handed it over. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector hummed to life. On the massive screen behind me, documents appeared one after another. Loan agreements with Langford Bank, payment schedules in red, Nathan Brooks's signature at the bottom of every page. The laughter died instantly. Chairs scraped as people leaned forward. A collective murmur swept the hall. I turned back to the guests, my voice clear despite the pounding in my ears. I said this was the man my family praised. This was the man my sister was marrying. A groom drowning in debt, hiding behind charm. Gasps rose from the tables. Nate's face flushed red. He stood halfway out of his seat, stammering that it was a mistake, that the documents were fake. But then the emails appeared, projected in crisp black and white, complete with timestamps. His words collapsed under the weight of proof. I drew a breath and lifted another sheet from my clutch, holding it high. The screen shifted again now, showing my grandfather's original will. My name was written in his careful handwriting as the heir to his house and jewelry. I turned my head toward my mother. My voice did not waver as I asked how long she intended to hide it from me. The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint buzz of the projector. Helen's hands gripped the edge of the table, her face pale as stone. Guests turned to stare at her, then at my father, then at Lily, who sat frozen beside her fiancé. I lowered the paper slowly, letting the silence stretch. Every eye in the ballroom was locked on my family and the man who had humiliated me only hours before. My heart thudded hard, but for the first time in years, I felt taller than all of them. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, unsure whether to continue. A cough broke the silence from one corner, then whispers rose, spreading like fire. People shook their heads, some covering their mouths, others glancing toward the exit. I stepped back from the microphone. Nate remained standing, fists clenched, his glass shattered on the floor beside him. Lily reached for him, but he yanked his arm away. My mother stared at me as if I had struck her. Her lips parted with no words. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The ballroom that had glittered with music and laughter now felt heavy with judgment. I knew the night was not finished. The fallout had only begun, and the cracks I had opened would split wide before the last song played. Douglas Langford rose from his seat near the back, the rustle of his suit audible in the silence. His voice cut clean through the whispers as he stated that the debt shown on the screen was real and that his bank had been chasing Nathan Brooks for months. A wave of gasps rolled across the ballroom sharper than any music could have been. Nate's face went pale. He stuttered that it was a mistake, some sort of clerical error, but sweat gathered on his forehead and his collar stuck damp to his skin. He tried to push away from the table, but the hotel manager stepped forward, whispering firmly that the bill for the evening had not yet been paid. The manager blocked his path to the exit, and Nate's voice cracked as he barked at him to move. Guests rose from their chairs to see better, some raising their phones, recording every second. The glow of screens lit up the dark corners of the ballroom. Lily stood her veil trembling as she reached for Nate's arm, begging him not to leave. He yanked free, sending her stumbling backward. The train of her gown caught on a chair, and she tumbled to the floor with a cry that silenced even the laughter. Her bridesmaids rushed forward, but the damage was done. The image of a bride sprawled on the floor of her own reception was already being captured by dozens of lenses. Robert pressed a hand over his mouth, looking as if he had aged years in an instant. Helen covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking not from tears, but from shame. Around them the murmurs grew louder, guests speaking openly now about deception, about greed, about how quickly the shine of wealth could fade. I remained near the stage, steady on my feet, the light from the projector casting shadows behind me. I did not need to say another word. Every truth I had carried was already unraveling them faster than I could have imagined. The screens in the room replayed the evidence in a loop, as though mocking every smile they had worn when the evening began. Nate shoved at the manager, but another staff member joined, firm hands guiding him back. His voice turned into a snarl, curses flying. The mask of charm shattered completely. Lily, now standing with help from a bridesmaid, sobbed openly, mascara streaking down her face. Her perfect day, the one my parents had guarded with such ferocity, had collapsed into spectacle. Guests pulled out chairs and left in small groups, muttering about refunds and ruined weekends. A few stayed behind, eager to watch the scandal unfold, their phones raised like weapons. I caught one woman's voice as she whispered to her friend that no one in town would forget this night. The ballroom, once a cathedral of light and music, now smelled of spilled wine and fear. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not triumph, but release. For years I had carried the weight of invisibility, the ache of being less than. Now the truth stood in the open, undeniable, reflected in the horrified faces of my family and the broken image of the man they had praised. I did not move toward Lily. I did not speak to my parents. I stood still, watching the chaos unfold around me. It was not cruelty that kept me silent. It was the knowledge that no voice of mine could compete with the roar of evidence echoing through that hall. Outside, I could see flashes from cameras as guests streamed into the lobby. The story had already left the ballroom, traveling faster than any of us could follow. By morning, it would belong to everyone. I felt the pull to walk out then, to leave them in the ruins they had built. But something inside me told me the night had one more moment waiting, one final turn before it was done. The music had stopped, the band quietly packing their instruments as the ballroom dissolved into chaos. I stood still, the weight of 100 stares pressing against my back, yet none of them mattered anymore. My mother's face was hidden behind her trembling hands. My father kept his eyes on the floor. Lily sobbed in the arms of her bridesmaids, her dress torn and stained. And Nate, red-faced and desperate, still shouted at anyone who would listen, but his words had lost all power. I turned toward the doors and felt the cool air rush in as they opened. Ethan appeared near the entrance, his eyes steady on mine, and behind him was Maggie with her phone still in her hand. They moved toward me, weaving through the guests, who now whispered freely, their voices sharp as knives. When they reached me, Maggie slipped her arm through mine. Her voice was low but firm. "You did it! You made them see!" Ethan nodded, his tone measured. "This was never about revenge, Rachel. This was about the truth." The three of us stepped into the lobby where the crystal chandeliers sparkled above empty tables littered with half-finished drinks. Reporters who had been invited to cover the glamorous wedding now scribbled notes about its collapse. Flashbulbs went off near the entrance as curious onlookers pressed closer, hoping to capture a photo of the disgraced groom. I walked through it all without lowering my head. For years I had practiced being small, slipping out of sight, never demanding space. Tonight I claimed it every step, echoing louder than the last. Outside, the mountain air hit my skin, crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine. The hotel lights glowed behind us, a reminder of what I had left inside. As I reached the car, my phone buzzed. A text lit the screen from an unknown number. It read, "You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do. You told the truth." My throat tightened as I read it again, the words blurring. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and exhaled, the weight of years lifting slowly from my shoulders. We slid into the back seat, Maggie beside me, Ethan across. The car pulled away from the hotel headlights, carving through the dark highway that wound down the mountain. I leaned my head against the window and watched Aspen shrink into the distance. For the first time in years, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen, heard, and undeniable. Memories flooded in as the town lights faded behind us. The cupcake on Lily's birthday, my diploma gathering dust, my mother's dismissive smile, my father's silence. Each wound stitched itself closed under the steady beat of the tires on the road. My grandfather's voice whispered in my memory, telling me that persistence was strength when no one clapped. Tonight I had persisted, and the applause came not from my family, but from the truth itself. The silence in the car was comforting, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Maggie squeezed my hand, and Ethan met my gaze with quiet affirmation. Outside the window, the night stretched wide and endless, the stars sharp against the black sky. I straightened in my seat, my reflection faint in the glass, and spoke softly to myself. Justice does not always live in a courtroom. Sometimes it lives in the courage to speak in the moment the truth is dragged into the light. As the car curved along the highway, I let a final thought settle in my chest, one that I want you to carry too. If you have ever been silenced, if you have ever been made to feel invisible, remember this. The truth has a power all its own, and when the time comes, it will shine. Share your thoughts with me. Share your own stories, because your voice matters more than you think.